Welcome, everyone, to the June 28, 2021 Merriam City Council meeting. I'd like to start our meeting off by asking everyone to please stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good, thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Sism.
Here.
Councilmember DeVold.
Here.
Councilmember Hands.
Here.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Here.
Councilmember Naff.
Here.
Councilmember Neal.
Here.
Councilmember Pape.
Here.
Councilmember Silvers.
Here.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Here.
Very good. We're going to move into public items. Under the heading of public items, members of the public are encouraged to use this time to make comments about matters that do not appear on the agenda. Comments about items on the regular agenda will be taken as each item is considered. There's a 5-minute limit on comments. In accordance with the governing body rules and procedures, the city reserves the right to refuse public comments that are personal, impertinent, or slanderous. We have a sign-up sheet for those who might be interested. No one has signed up this evening, but just in case you didn't know, the sign-up sheet was there, and you do have a desire to make a public comment. Now would be the time to come forward to do so. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and move on to our consent agenda. We only have one item on the consent agenda this evening, and that's the approval of the minutes of the June 14th City Council meeting. So I'll entertain a motion in a second. Jason?
Motion that, oh, sorry, not prepared. I move that the council.
You have your mic on? Very good.
Sorry, I move that the council approve the consent agenda number 1.
And Bob Pape?
I'll second, Mayor.
Motion's made and seconded. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember DeVold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. I'm going to add a couple things to the mayor's report before we ask Mr. Little to come up. First thing is Flags for Freedom. I want to thank all those people involved in getting the flags put in the ground. They look great. A lot of work, and it's always a special time of the year when we see them go up, so I want to make sure those folks get the acknowledgement that they deserve. Excuse me.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'd like to add that there is a Flags for Freedom Facebook page that has some pictures, and it invites more pictures. If anybody is down at the field and sees something cute, be sure and pass it along.
Very good. The second item is kind of a serious item. We have, as we all know, a very horrible tragedy that's occurred in Florida. And this is a city issue because a building collapsed, and they're still trying to find people. So hopefully we can take some time in our private lives to think about the families, the survivors, and hope that there's some other folks found that are still alive. It's going to be a long mission to get solved. But being a mayor of a city, I can only imagine what it would be like. And Miami's such a huge city with structures, aging structures. I think this is going to shed new light on the need for a better job of inspections and those kinds of things. And again, it's just a terrible tragedy. I want to acknowledge that. The one remaining thing we have is a report from our legislative liaison with the Kansas State. And Stuart Little, would you come and tell us what wonderful things are going on in Topeka?
Well,
There we go. The best thing I can tell you is that the legislature is gone, so that's always some comfort. I'm Stuart Little with Little Government Relations based in Topeka, and joined tonight by Mallory Lutz, my associate, and we're both going to talk a little bit about some of the topics. Be respectful of your time, get through a summary. I wanted to thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and Mr. Engel for letting us continue to work with you all. We have a strong commitment to local government, always have. We also represent the Shawnee Mission School District, so we're interested in making sure that you all are aware of everything that's going on, so thank you for that. If you please feel free to interrupt with questions at the discretion of the mayor, or if you want to follow up, we're happy. If there's something we can't answer, we'll be happy to get back to you on that. We're going to give you just kind of an overview. The session's over. The legislature left on the 7th of this month, and so we've had a time to kind of sort through a lot of things. You have a written report from us that came out, and we'll give you some updated information on that. But this is going to be more kind of an overview. You can refer to that written report. We'll talk a bit about the session that was shaped a lot by the 2020 elections just a year ago, when we had kind of changes in the legislature, a stronger Republican supermajority. The governor still as the ability to veto some legislation, and there were some things that were vetoed, lots of things vetoed, and some of them overridden or not. That has an impact. We'll give some of the highlights of some of the summaries, talk about some specific issues. In the written report you all have, there's also a list of, I think, 7 or 8 bills, pieces of legislation that we provided testimony on, and that's, of course, working with the other Northeast Johnson County cities that we all kind of collaboratively work together on. There's testimony that we sent in and submitted or provided at those points, so you can see that as well. Mallory's going to talk about some of the big themes. I'll hit a couple of specific issues, and then we'll talk a bit about what to anticipate next year as we begin to think and plan going forward. So,
as Stuart said, I'm Mallory Lutz. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you in Topeka, but it's also nice to see some new faces. So, as Stuart said, I'll start out with kind of a 30,000-foot big picture overview before we get into some specifics. I want to cover kind of 5 things that really took up a lot of time and attention during the session. The first one being changes to the state's KEMA, Kansas Emergency Management Act, and some COVID business relief. So the legislature made some pretty significant changes, as you all know, to KEMA, including new requirements to hold hearings for parties aggrieved by emergency orders. So you've probably seen in the news lately about how some of those are kind of moot at this point, specifically as they relate to school districts, since the disaster declaration that we'd been operating under for, I think, about a year and a half is no longer with us. So that expired June 15th. I would note that the grievance process for orders issued by cities and counties does remain in place for future emergency declarations. The other changes made to KEMA largely focus on increased legislative oversight and making local electeds, counties in particular, in charge of public health and emergency decisions. Second item that's COVID-related, Senate Bill 273 would have required you all to give up 35% of your ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, to reimburse local businesses here. So luckily, that was vetoed by the governor, and the legislature made no attempt to override that. So. Second item, major income tax cut bill, Senate Bill 50, and I really only bring this up to discuss the marketplace facilitator provision that was included in the bill. So this had been talked about for years in an effort to level the playing field between local brick and mortar stores and remote sellers. So this requires marketplace facilitators to collect and remit sales, compensating use, transient guest taxes, and prepaid wireless 911 fees. So this is going to give the state about $42 million within the first fiscal year. So. Third item, property taxes. This is probably the item that it seems like we spend the most time every year on for you all. 2 major bills I will mention. The first is Senate Bill 13. You're probably tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of talking about it. But this repeals the tax lid, thankfully, but it also does put in place some new transparency requirements for you all by establishing notice and public hearing requirements prior to the approval of a governing body to exceed that revenue neutral rate. So In terms of the timeline, I would mention one thing that is kind of coming up on the horizon is that is the July 20th deadline for when you must notify the county clerk if you're intending to exceed that revenue neutral rate. I would mention that the League of Municipalities has a great infographic on their website, and that we included a link to in our last report because it does a really good job, a much better job than I can do of explaining the process. Second major property tax bill I'll mention is House Bill 2313. This provides reimbursement of property taxes for certain businesses due to shutdowns or restrictions during a declared state of emergency. So this does not impact COVID restrictions, thankfully, but this is prospective going forward, and it will go into effect next January. So we're not entirely sure how this plays out yet, and there may be some unintended consequences. So this is something that we'll be watching next session and beyond, probably. Fourth item I would just briefly mention, and I bring this up because you'll be hearing a lot about it during the 2022 primary. This is the abortion constitutional amendment that both chambers passed that will ask voters in August 2022 to decide if the legislature, not the Supreme Court, can determine whether women have the constitutional right to an abortion. Lastly, I will briefly mention school finance. There was much debate this session about non-public schools and expanding school choice, which we expect to continue to be a topic next session, but I would note that the most important thing is that the legislature fully funded K-12 education as outlined in Gannon for the third year in a row. So I'm happy to turn it back over to Stuart for specifics.
Couple of things that came up specifically, and those were kind of the big five things that most of the time and energy was taken up with the legislature. Obviously, the tax issues, those kind of things having an impact. I would mention House Bill 2452, which is a bill that changes the distribution of sales tax revenue for car sales. It was introduced by a rural legislator who was having conversations with other folks who go off to the cities and buy their big trucks, and the sales tax for those are retained in the jurisdictions that invest the resources and the infrastructure to facilitate those sales, and they want to be able to take this bill would change that the sales tax would stay in the county where the vehicle is purchased and would instead go to the county to which the vehicle is registered. The reason I am here is about 20 years ago, Mr. Engel's predecessor, Phil Lammers, we had a battle about this about 20 years ago as well. So the bill was introduced. There are active efforts by the folks who want to see it passed to talk to folks over the legislative session. Might make an interesting and good election issue for some folks, so it's liable to come up. The elections are underlying everything we'll talk about in 2022. That bill was introduced, didn't get a hearing. I suspect it may when we get back in 2022, and that's something to keep an eye out because obviously we're all keenly aware of the impact that legislation would have here and in lots of other parts of the state. There was another bill, Senate Bill 118, that was passed that allows for a simpler process for consolidating local units of government, townships, drainage districts, library districts, those kind of things. This is legislation at the League, and we'd been supporting for a while to pull together and make some consolidation plans in an effort to kind of address the issues of how many units of government do we really need and can do without. I would note that star bonds were renewed. The statutes, there weren't that I paid attention to. I don't think any changes made to TIF programs and those kind of things, but it was a renewal and some clarification of some parts of the star bonds program. So those are some of the specific things that we've been watching. And then we would kind of just transition here at the end to talk about 2022. There's a long list of issues coming up that are carried over. Just concluded the first year of a 2-year cycle, so all the bills are alive next session as well. Obviously, elections, everybody in the legislature is facing re-election next year. The governor's race will take place. And so everything that's going to happen in Topeka from January to June is going to be framed within that context. The second thing I would point out is that redistricting happens next legislative session. And that is the least talked about, the least followed, the least explained, but the most contentious and divisive issue in Topeka, because you're going to be carving up congressional districts and House and Senate districts in Kansas, and the dynamics of how votes play out compared to what happens to your district are unbelievable. So that'll make everything even more interesting next legislative session. So within that context, we're going to keep an eye on the CITUS bill, obviously. There's another bill, Senate Bill 87, that essentially removed the county's obligation to have a formula to distribute sales tax dollars to cities or other governmental entities. It came out of Atchison. They said, we want to get rid of the requirements. The county gets to decide how all the money's spent, and they can do whatever they want with it. That had a hearing. We've had lots of conversations about it. The bill has not advanced yet, but we're going to come back to it because the proposal from the Senate tax chair is that after July 1 of next year, I think any renewed or new sales taxes, if a county decides they want to keep and distribute that revenue however they want, that it would be the county would have to provide 60 days notice, and then they'd have to have a hearing on it. But it would remove the requirement and give counties the option to keep and retain those dollars going forward. That's obviously something to keep an eye on as well. There is going to be, we haven't talked about eminent domain in about 5 or 6 years in the legislature, so that's back. There's a bill that it's called the Fairness and Eminent Domain Act, I think, and it will create a judicial hearing process, and that would have everything from right-of-way issues, all those kind of things. You all would be required to provide notice to landowners. It would set up a hearing process, and it would be quite elaborate, but it's also designed to make sure that property owners know what's going on. The last thing I would mention before Mallory wraps up is that it gets back to property tax, dark store theory with regard to how commercial property is valued and how that's been kind of an underlying theme going on for a long time, particularly here in Johnson County, and that commercial interests believe that the valuations are too high because they're based on the income, and I believe that's what the appraiser is supposed to do, but they want to have the buildings valued as if they were empty and there was nothing inside. There was here in Johnson County a district court decision that supported that argument, so I think, and that was kind of late enough in the legislative session, it was not a keen issue. It's kind of lying in the background, but I think that's going to spark some additional discussion next legislative session about codifying the language in that district court decision. So, and do you want me to take questions? You want to wait till?
Why don't you wait? We'll wait till.
Okay. Did you want to wrap up?
Okay, so I just have 3 more items to discuss, and then we're happy to take questions. So this next one, I always feel like I have to use air quotes or something when I talk about it, but competition with government services. So this is something that came up this year, well, in the last couple of years, but it really stems from the property tax exemption for health clubs. So House Bill 2445 quickly got some traction this session, and kudos to Chris and the others that we work with for getting us great numbers to work with. And I think this was one of those situations where we were asked on Friday to put testimony together for a Monday hearing, and we got it together really, really quickly, so we really appreciate that. But the property tax exemption for health clubs, this was actually added to a bill that was not passed on the Senate floor, and they ended up settling on a study instead to be conducted by the Legislative Post Audit to look at this issue. So they're going to be studying the impact of governmental and nonprofit organizations competing with for-profit businesses. So we will probably see this study sometime later this summer, early into the fall, and then that, of course, will foster renewed discussion on this issue when they return in January. So something we're definitely keeping our eye on. Next issue, medical marijuana. For the first time, this passed the Kansas House pretty overwhelmingly. I think it was 79 or 80 to 42. The Senate did not take up the issue, and I expect if they do next year, they're going to start with their own bill. So we're kind of starting with square one again here. I bring this up really to note one thing specifically for municipalities. As the bill currently sits, it does allow counties to opt out of the entire arrangement. So they could prohibit growers, dispensaries, or distributors while still allowing possession. just no growing or selling. And I think other states, including Colorado, have this set up. Not that I would know, but that's what I heard in committee. So lastly, I will just mention COVID relief and the Spark Task Force. So I was hoping to have a bit of a break this summer with from the Spark Task Force and talking about federal funds, but it's a bit of deja vu this summer. The Spark Task Force has reconvened. It looks a little bit differently. There's some new members on it. But they are going to be discussing how to spend the $1.6 billion in discretionary funds that are coming to the state. And this round, as you recall last year, a lot of those funds were focused on how do we keep government operating and these essential immediate needs. So this year, the focus is going to be a little bit differently. Some of the things they've talked just in their first meeting last week, things like economic revitalization, behavioral health, connectivity, and early childhood development. So again, this is very, very early conversations. Nothing is set in stone, and there's still some logistical and functional things to work out between the Spark Committee and legislative leadership, which can be contentious at times. And of course, with this round of federal funds, the nice thing is that you have a lot more time to expend or obligate and expend these funds. December 2024 to obligate the funds and December 2026 to actually expend those funds. I would just mention one concrete idea that was discussed at the first meeting last week. Doesn't really have an impact on you, but it does relate to townships. And as you recall, there was a little bit of worry that some of your money was going to be taken away and given to townships. Luckily, that did not happen. But there is a proposal to take $20 million of the discretionary funds to give to some of those larger townships that maybe operate fire or EMS. The task force did not agree to that, so I'm not even sure if it's going to happen, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So all that to say, we'll be watching what the Spark Committee does and reporting on anything relevant opportunities or decisions they make for you all. So thank you. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to.
Mr. Neal?
You mentioned the decision on the dark store commercial property valuation. Is there any way to get a copy of that decision or a link to it that I'd like to take a look at it?
Yeah, we'll find something and send it back and copy you too, Chris.
Thank you.
Any other questions about anything that was covered or anything else having to do with the legislature that you'd like an answer from these folks? Go ahead.
Hi, good to see you guys in person. Has the Senate drafted their medical cannabis bill yet? And if so, what are the key differences between the House and the Senate bills, if they can be summarized?
I do not believe they have. There was not even a hearing on the Senate side this year at all. So if they have, I'm not privy to any of those.
I mean, we've got medical cannabis, sports, gaming, all those kinds of things up there, and they're moving around. And I think this one was and kind of surprisingly pushed out of committee very, very late, and so I think the Senate was like, we can't even wrap our mind around it, so they're hanging on for your.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move into council items. And first item on the agenda this evening is consider approval and ordinance amending Chapter 59, Article 3 of the Merriam Code of Ordinance related to the right-of-way use and excavations. This is a second reading, I believe, is it not? And we did have some discussion on this matter a couple weeks ago. Seems fairly straightforward. Did anybody have any questions before entertain a motion in a second? Okay, well then I'll entertain a motion in a second. Bob?
Excuse me. I'd move the council approve an ordinance amending Chapter 59 of the Merriam Code of Ordinances related to the right-of-way use and excavations.
Second, I'd like to second that.
Motion made and second, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. Next item has to do with the renaming of Lee Drive, and the person who got this ball started is in our audience, former council member Todd Boyer and his beautiful family that are here this evening. We did have, again, discussion on the item 2 weeks ago, a fairly straightforward item. Anyone have any questions to cover before we go to the next step?
Mayor, real quickly, I just want to add, I don't think I mentioned it last meeting, but this will take effect September 1st. That'll give time for us to distribute the information and everything. So if it's passed this evening, it'll be effective the 1st of September.
Very good. Then Chris, did you want to make a motion?
I do.
Christine?
I move that the council approve an ordinance renaming Lee Drive effective September 1st.
Have a motion and second? Go ahead.
I'd second, Mayor.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodrich.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good, and thank you for your suggestion, Mr. Boyer. Next item is consider approval of an ordinance concerning the CMB and alcohol liquor. This is a first reading. Did we want to have a discussion on this item? I know this is going to make a profound difference in the lives of all of us here.
It will. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The item before you is consider approval of an ordinance amending the hours for Sunday sales of CMB and retail alcoholic liquor. Recent changes to state law allows for Sunday sales of CMB and alcoholic liquor to begin at 9 a.m. Currently, the city code allows for those sales to occur at noon. Just so we all kind of understand the difference between the two, CMB stands for cereal malt beverage. It's 3.2 beer, basically. It has a much more technical definition, but for our purposes, it's typically referred to as 3.2 beer. These are typically sold at convenience stores, grocery stores. Walgreens, I think, Walgreens does have a CMB license, so they're sold in package for people to take. This change probably wouldn't really affect those businesses too much, as they're mostly open before 9 a.m. anyway, and they would just be able to sell sooner than noon. The alcoholic retail liquor, obviously, is your liquor stores, and they're going to sell everything else, the good stuff, the whiskey, the vodka, the good wine. We have two here in Merriam, one on 47th and the other on 75th Street. And this change would affect the liquor stores because typically their hours are 12 noon on Sunday. So before bringing this forward, staff did contact the liquor store owners to say, if they felt this would help their business. And both owners agreed that being able to sell before noon on Sundays, especially on the NFL season, would definitely help their business capture additional sales. Both indicated that while they could sell at 9, they likely would not open until 11 because they just didn't feel there would be a huge demand for the good stuff at 9 o'clock. But maybe. If approved, this would change our city code to mirror state law, and it would help our existing businesses capture some additional sales through Sunday. And that is in line with our council goals to support our existing businesses. And if approved, staff would notify all the license holders of the change so that they could amend their business operations as needed. And it is in effect now. However, if council wanted to waive the first reading, they could, but staff really doesn't see a big push for that. Obviously, the football season hasn't started, so we have a little bit of time to get this approved. And with that, I'm open for any questions.
Any questions?
Yes.
I have one quick one, and I have to admit I'm not a drinker, so I
Okay.
don't know. I thought they were able to start selling alcohol in grocery stores. If we do end up getting a grocery store, will this extend into that aspect of retail?
I am not sure if that was part of this legislation. on the grocery store part?
Where's Stuart
I'm
when you
looking
need
at the
him?
city attorney.
To my knowledge, I'm not familiar with the liquor. They do allow for enhanced CMB, which actually, I think it's up to like 6%.
Yeah.
And so that was the change in the law versus you can't sell like vodka or rum or anything like that in grocery stores, so.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising that they didn't phase out CMB since they were able to do that. That used to be the differentiation. If the liquor store was closed, you could go to a grocery store and buy, or Quick Trip, and buy 3.2 beer, but now they sell it all at 6%, so I don't really understand the need to have a CMB still, but.
Likely, if we had a grocery store open up in Merriam, they would probably sell beer. I mean, it's a profit center for them.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Appreciate it.
I have a,
Go ahead.
Well, this doesn't require, this is the first reading, so.
Right,
Yes.
but we both have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
my question was going to be, does anyone on the council see the need to have a second reading?
No, that's exactly what I was going to ask. I know.
Do I need to make a motion to waive the first reading?
Sure, if everybody's agreeable, I guess we'll find out on the vote, but yeah, go right ahead.
Let me find the official title here. All right. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that the council waive the first reading of a recommended change to the ordinance amending sections 548 and 585 of the Merriam Code of Ordinance to expand Sunday sales for CMB and retail liquor.
And I'll second that.
And this is a motion and a second to waive the first reading, Madam Clerk?
Yes. Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
That being completed, then I'd entertain a motion to,
I'll take it then. Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve an ordinance amending sections 548 and 585 of the Merriam Code of Ordinance to expand Sunday sales for CMB and retail liquor.
and
And again, I'll second that.
we have a motion and a second, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Councilmember Pape.
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers.
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBold.
Aye.
Councilmember Hands.
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. Guess we won't be seeing that in 2 weeks then.
There you go.
Next item is consider approval of budget adjustment for the 2021 utilities budget.
Good evening.
Evening.
Just oops, pull this. Where is the? Okay. Okay, tonight, staff is requesting an adjustment to the utility budget. We've had two things arise that are requiring this. The first is the electricity at the Merriam Community Center. As you may recall, whenever we adopted the 2021 budget, it was August of 2020, and the community center had just opened. So really, we had no actual data to base it on. Instead, it was based on a pro forma that was done prior to its construction. And through June of this year, we've expended $92,000 on electricity, and the budget is $125,000. So we're requesting to increase that by $125,000, and we're thinking the second half we may need a little more budget because of the summer heat, et cetera. So that's $125,000 of it. And then the gas at the Public Works Building, back in 2011, the city signed an agreement with a company called Constellation Gas, and that's who we were getting our gas through instead of Kansas Gas Service at the Public Works building, only at that building. Anyway, whenever February rolled around, there was, as you may remember, a very cold spill, and there was a surge in the price of natural gas. And in March, the city got a bill for $27,000 for 1 month. Since that time, the city has canceled our contract with Constellation Gas Service. Everybody is now on Kansas Gas Service, so we're not going to have that happen again. But it's unfortunate. We all knew that we were on Constellation Gas, but it happened before any of us started here, so we were naive, and so, but we've got that taken care of. So the total increase would be $152,500.
And did you state where that money was going to come from?
And that money is going to come from contingent.
Contingency. Mr. Neal?
Yeah, I was looking at this, and it looks to me, obviously, the electricity at the community center is double what the pro forma budget originally was made from, or was derived from. And I was wondering if we've done any kind of a look at what the reasons are, because it sounds like that we'd be looking at, the larger number going forward or something more approximating that. Have we done any kind of look back to see what assumptions were made in the pro forma versus what we're actually experiencing? I have some ideas, but I just was wondering, I'd kind of like to know that's kind of a big difference, so.
Right. That isn't something that I've taken a look at, but staff certainly could go back and take a look at the pro forma and see. I'm not sure if it provides that level of detail. Do you know, Mr. Engel?
It's basically just based on square footage, but we could go back and try to tear into the square footage and see how our square footage compares to the initial square footage. I mean, it's just a pro forma, but yeah, we could see where the variations are.
I think it's always helpful to kind of know when we're off quite a bit on something that's going to carry forward. If there are some things that maybe we could do to conserve electricity that we hadn't thought of, or just to understand why we are off that much, I think is valuable given, the variety of trying to be environmentally friendly and so forth. So I would sort of request to.
And I would also like to add that I would assume that the cost of electricity also has gone up in this interim since that was
Sure.
put together.
And that may be,
Right.
that may be the reason, obviously.
Especially the 2 weeks we had in February. I'm sure that didn't help.
Right.
Any other questions? Mr. Caldo?
Yes, question regarding the gas, the switch of gas vendors. Was that done based on the spike we had in February? What's the
Yes.
pricing of the gas from that vendor to our gas service? I mean, we went to it probably because it was quite a bit less expensive than gas service at the time.
Constellation, we were saving money from monthly, but in 1 month, we wiped out 10
Right.
years' worth of savings because the contract allows for surge pricing. So it was competitive at the Public Works facility. I think we were saving a little bit of money, and the rationale, I believe, it was before my time, but likely is that, that's a big barn that you're trying to keep warm with the doors opening and closing all winter long. So anywhere we could save money to keep that place heated, that made a lot of sense. But again, the contract allows for them to surge price, and that's gambling with the taxpayers' money as far as I'm concerned, and that's why we left them.
Okay, so we are paying more for it now.
Marginally more.
Okay.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion and a second regarding the approval of this adjustment. Mr. Pape?
Mayor, I'd move the council approve a budget adjustment for the 2021 utilities budget.
And second, Ms. Hans?
And I'll second that.
Motion and second made. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Pape,
Aye.
Councilmember Silvers,
Aye.
Councilmember Yodridge,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBolt,
Aye.
Councilmember Hands,
Aye.
Councilmember Caldwell.
Aye.
Councilmember Naff.
Aye.
Councilmember Neal.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. Monthly finance report.
Or, I'm sorry, we're going to do the revenue projections.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Yep, skipped it already. So we can
Sorry.
move back one, revenue projections.
Okay. So tonight, as part of the budget process, we're just going to take a look at where we think our major revenues are. And so if we look at what makes up our general fund revenues, we can see everything that's listed there in red is based on sales tax, which makes up, you can't, for some reason, the big pie disappeared. The label on it, but that makes up 57% of our sales tax. 35% of that biggest chunk, is from automobile dealerships. And so 35% of our total revenue pie is from automobile sales. Then if you see the blue shell, that is property tax, and that is 27% of our revenue comes from property tax. 15% of it is from commercial businesses, and 12% is from property tax. So between sales tax and property tax, that's where our money really is coming in from. When we look at sales tax, we can see that we had 1% growth in 18 and 19. And then last year, we had a 2% growth, which I'm sure you can probably remember this time last year. If you had said we were only going to have a 2% decrease, we would have celebrated because we were fearing 20, 30%. This year, it shows that we're having a 5% increase. And it's kind of like, wait a minute, that sounds big. But really, that's 5% over that negative 2% that we had. If you look at that growth from 19 through 21, it's actually only about 2.5% growth. And in addition, we had a major retailer come into play in the last year that is bringing in significant sales tax dollars. And so that 400, it's not even 400,000, it's around 340,000 increase should easily be covered by that. So, and then for this next year, really it's just a very slight increase. Property tax, right now we're looking at general fund and bond property tax revenue of $6.2 million. That's an increase of $332,000. We're looking at no change to the city mill rate, keeping it at 27.558 mills, and an assessed valuation of $226,300,000. When we look at that assessed valuation, 120 million of that, or 53%, is commercial, and 101 million, or 44%, comes from residential. So that kind of shows you the breakdown of where we get our property tax from. Yes, sir.
Is that the assessments for 2021 or for projected for 22?
This would be the assessment that's levied, or the assessment that's made in 2021 for 2022 property tax.
So this is our projection for 22?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, it
thank you.
is.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually had a couple of questions. The slide you just showed, is that all property tax or just the property tax that's in the general fund?
That's all.
Okay.
I mean, the assessed valuation
Right.
kind of applies.
So, and earlier you were, a few slides back, when we were looking at the revenue chunks, that was specifically for the general fund, correct?
That is correct.
So that one did not include the property taxes for the I-35 TIF district. Those would be in a separate accounting
That is
bucket.
correct.
So basically, of the portion of the commercial value in that last slide, that was in the overall assessed value? About how much, is there a breakdown between the residential and commercial for the part that's in the general fund?
Okay, of the 119 million that is commercial, of that, around 40 million is in the I-35 TIF.
Okay. And so basically, you're looking at 80 million commercial in the general fund versus 101 million on the residential side. So the residential side is a larger piece in the general fund.
That would be correct.
Okay. And then the other question that I had was back a bit, when you were talking about the percentage of our revenues that come from sales tax being 57%.
Huh?
And my recollection in previous times was we were around 52%, 53%. So is that correct, that we're sort of more of our revenue is now dependent on the sales tax side than it has been? Do you remember, I mean, I just remember like when I was doing numbers for the COVID relief last year and trying to send information to our federal elected officials about it, I think that number was 52%. So that's a tick upwards in terms of the percentage that were dependent on sales tax.
Actually, whenever I did this, I initially did this just for 2020, and then I went ahead and looked back at what we had the prior 3 years, and that percentage really doesn't vary that much. I mean, in 2019, instead of it being 57%, it was like, I think, 55%.
Okay.
And so it just kind of, now, that includes the county sales tax, that includes the use tax. I mean, that's
Well, it could,
all
it could-
tax.
Yeah, it could be that,
But
yeah, it just could be that we have more sales tax now because of the difference between last year. I don't know. Anyway, I just remembered somewhere, 52, 53%, but I don't know if that was right. But anyway, that's
Okay.
fine. As long as it's relatively consistent, that's what I'm concerned with.
Mr. Pape,
Yeah, I'm assuming I know the answers, but.
is your,
Thank you, Mayor. When we're talking about apartment complexes, is that considered residential or is that on the commercial side?
that is considered residential.
It is residential. Okay, thank you.
I believe that's right. Yes, I know it is. I second guess myself. Yes, that
question,
is
though.
residential.
any other questions? You can proceed.
Okay. Okay. And much as the representatives from Stuart Little said, we had the Senate Bill 13, which Mr. Engel has also talked to you about, and that repealed the tax lid and it replaced with the revenue neutral rate. And that rate is defined as the tax rate for the current year that would generate the same property tax revenue as levied the previous tax year using the current tax year's total assessed valuation, which is a really long sentence that's hard to follow. And so I have an example here on the next slide. But basically what this is saying is under the tax lid, we had an allowance for inflation. We had an allowance for new construction. This no longer has any allowances at all. And if the city wants to exceed this revenue neutral rate, then we have to notify the county of our intent, and then we have to hold a public hearing and pass a resolution to exceed it. So the way that is calculated, last year we had an assessed valuation of $214 million. Our levy was 27.558 mils. So our total property tax collection was $5,905,000. So basically, what your mill is under the revenue neutral rate is backed into. You take your assessed valuation and you say, what mill do I need to generate $5,905,000? And that would be 26.090. So unless we exceed the revenue neutral rate, we're essentially rolling back the mill 1.5 mills. In the budget that staff has been working on and preparing, we have assumed that we are going to exceed the revenue neutral rate and can really continue handling property tax the way that we've been handling it and keeping it at the same rate versus looking at the revenue neutral rate. So that would bring us down to the total levy of 6.2 million. However, in the interest of just curiosity, I did go back and I looked at what does it look like if we were still under the property tax lid. And under it, I would have shown you a chart that looks like this. And we would have had the following allowances. We would have had increases to police and fire, a CPI or inflation, new construction, change in debt service levy, and so that would have allowed us to increase by 436,000, and our amount is in excess of the revenue neutral rate is 332,000. So under it, we would have been within the tax lid and not having to roll back the mill levy. So if we look at our general fund balance versus the percent of revenue, our city policy says that our goal is to be within 30 and 35%, the general fund balance within those percentages of operating revenue or general fund revenue. And so with the budget that has been prepared and that we'll be sharing with you at the next city council meeting, we end up with a fund balance just under 7 million, and our percentage is 33.1% of operating revenue. So it's right in there. So if we look at what's left on the calendar, then next week, as I've said, we'll have the detailed draft budget review, and then we'll kind of need to determine whether or not there's an intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate. If at that time we decide there is an intention, you're not really voting at that point to exceed it. What you will be saying is, we want to have a public hearing and decide whether or not we're going to raise it, essentially. Because what that kicks off, if you decide to next time to do that, it'll kick off myself sending a notice to the county clerk that we have an intent to exceed it. Then on August 23rd, we'd have a public hearing to consider exceeding it and to also adopt the budget. Then you would need to pass a resolution and to adopt it. And then by August 30, or on August 30th, I'd need to certify it to the county clerk. However, if you decide, no, we do not want to exceed it, then we would need to notify the county clerk of that as well. So, are there any questions?
Mr. Neal?
Can you go back a slide? So the general fund balance versus the percent of revenue is going down. I assume some of that has to do with, spending on the capital projects that we've had. I don't know, but could you kind of give your interpretation of the declining percentage of, the general fund balance?
Sure.
Is it because we just have that much less money and we're not replenishing it, or did we already plan to deplete it to this point?
I think there's a couple of factors that go into that. One of them is that in 2020, because we didn't know what was going to happen with our revenue base, we deferred quite a few expenditures. We assumed very low sales tax, and then we were pleasantly surprised and we were only down, 2%. And so that really helped that grow some. And then I think some of it too is we have conservative budgeting. We still don't know what's going to happen with sales tax as far as the pandemic goes and supply chain issues. So we're certainly not forecasting gangbusters on that. We know that CITUS has been proposed at the Kansas State Legislature. We know that dark store theory is in play. And so really, while we have a tremendous revenue stream, we also have somewhat of a vulnerable one in that we need higher fund balances. And so I feel as I go out there and I forecast revenues, I do that conservatively so that we're not getting ourselves way ahead of ourselves and then, oh, wait a minute, CITUS came through and we have no reserves.
If I could add to that, I think we assume we're going to spend 100% of our budget there. We likely don't. You know, we might spend 98, we might spend 96 last year. I think we spent 86 because we
Right.
cut so much spending. So, I mean, those assume that we're going to spend every dollar that we budget. So in reality, 5 years from now, when we look back, it'll probably be a little bit higher, but we don't know what it'll be. Because we budget contingency accounts and things in there that we assume we're going to spend that we hope we don't. So we build those, that's part of the conservative budgeting philosophy we use.
Years ago, we had a situation in our city where we had a tremendous flood. And we ended up going in and buying 30 houses with the federal government. And of course, the government didn't pay for all of it. But it cost the city millions of dollars. Luckily, we had reserves at hand to do that. That was a totally unforeseen expenditure. So having those reserves is important for those types of things. And of course, that doesn't even include the things that are likely to happen to us, and we know about it. And having those funds are a great advantage. Mr. Caldwell?
Trying to wrap my head around some of this, but didn't building the community center drive up higher fund balances during the construction process? That now that we've expended those funds, we're getting our fund balances back down?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, it did drive up fund balances, but not in the general fund, over in the construction. And so this is really looking at the general fund. But that is a very perceptive comment.
Ms. Attridge?
And what we're looking at, right, would be, are those actuals for 18, 19, 20, and then
Yes.
the rest are estimates? So it's likely we could have seen something different. We were looking at the estimate or projections for 18, 19, 20 as well.
Yes, you would have. You would have. And I am willing to go on the record saying, I don't know what 2020 will be, but it won't be exactly that number. Well, it might be, and then I'm a hero, but I don't think it will be.
Any other questions? Okay,
Okay, then we will see you in 2 weeks.
very good. Now, monthly finance report.
Let me shift gears here. Okay. As you may have seen in the May report and also in the admin report from Mr. Engel, our sales tax collections and our automobile sales continue at a brisk pace. Again, I think though, if you drive by car dealership lots, you don't see a lot of cars, and so there is some caution among the good news. In looking at the finance report, you would also see that we are under budget on the transient guest tax. That is the one revenue, that is the hotel motel tax, that continues to lag. However, I've heard that some of those occupancy rates are going back up, and hopefully we will see improvements in that. And also, I just wanted to point out, franchise fees, they look like they're kind of lagging, but actually, in the May report, we had not yet received the Evergy, and so with that, we were right at budget. Expenditures are right on target, right where you would think, under budget, and so I think everything is progressing well, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about the monthly report.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Item number 7 is our community development update. Mr. Dyer?
Evening, Mayor, council members, Brian Dyer, Community Development Director. Just a couple of things to update you on. The first two is the Planning Sustainable Places grants. If you remember, those are the Mid-America Regional Council MARC grants that we have partnered with them on. The first one is for the northern section of Merriam Drive. We're also working with Overland Park and Unified Government on that. There was a tour done of that part. That's the area that's kind of going pretty much from Antioch Drive up to Southwest Boulevard. Did a group tour with that. I know a couple of council members who are involved with that, as well as staff, so that was fantastic. So that project continues to move forward. And the other Planning Sustainable Places grant is our downtown Merriam Drive grant. As you guys will remember, last month you approved the advisory committee. We also sent out some letters to everybody in that corridor, all the business owners, to see if they'd be interested in being a part of the stakeholders group. The advisory group is kind of the smaller working group. The stakeholder group will be the group that advisory group bounces ideas off of, gets some feedback on, things like that. So we've had some good response on the stakeholders group. So had a lot of folks have been emailing me and showing interest to be on that. The advisory committee is going to have their first meeting here in a couple of weeks in July. So that will be really be getting that project rolling forward at that point in time. Also, speaking of downtown, we have the downtown exterior grant that the city has. We weren't getting a lot of interest in that, even though we've been promoting it through all the social media and talking with business owners and things down there. So our neighborhood services manager, David Easy, put together a letter and a package of all the information, sent it out to everybody, all the business owners within that area, and got some interest in that. So hopefully we'll get some more takers in that here in the next couple of weeks. We'll also get some feedback from the business owners also to see kind of what changes they might want to see in that program to make it a little bit more accessible or something to be more interested in. So we'll be talking about that when we start talking about our 2022 grant programs. And then the other two grants that we'll talk to you about, again, these are city grants. Our sustainable grant, that's the one for residents who want to do changes to their homes that are energy efficient and things like that. That program went very well. We have expended all that money. We're waiting for one more project to come through, and then I guess we've allocated all the money. We're waiting for one more project to come through, and then we'll have expended all those funds. And then our exterior home improvement grant that's going along very well also. So both of those have been, residents have been very excited about those and participated in those in a big way. And then the last thing I have is the Planning Commission is planning on meeting in person, much like you are, here on August 4th. So just wanted to pass that on, that they are all very excited to get back together again. And so we will be doing that very soon. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Bob Pape.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my question is, you, at least in the residential grants that you talked about, the sustainability one and the home exterior, that we've used up all those funds. Is that something that, how many people, I guess, were in queue that we had to turn away? Are we looking at for the next year's budget? Do we need to increase those funds to offer more? That's my question.
You're clairvoyant this evening, Mr. Pape. Yes, we will be likely bringing forward the request to increase the funding for both of those grant programs for 2022.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Engel, do we have any staff items this evening?
I just have a couple. Just CAFR, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report from the audit, is due for those that dig all these numbers. Or also the PAFR, the Popular Annual Financial Report, for those that like theirs more petite and bite-sized in their information. Those are both available and online. Appreciate the finance department's effort in putting those together. These actually are award-winning. documents to go along with our budget. So wanted to make sure the council knew those are out. These are great documents to answer lots of questions that we do have about the public checkbook. And then I will be out of the office after Wednesday in Las Vegas for nationals for my daughter's volleyball. But I will be checking email. I'll be back beginning of next week.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn. Bob Pape.
I make a motion, we adjourn, Mayor.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.